All right, everyone, welcome back to Getting in a College Coach Conversation. We've got an office hours segment here. If you are watching on the video feed, you can probably already see that we've got my colleague, Becky Leichling, here joining us today. Now, Becky, you are my longest friend here at College Coach. You're the reason that I'm at College Coach. And when you and I started, we both worked out of our Palo Alto office. And I think you were there for 5 years in total based in California. I was there for just 3. But we continue to work a lot to support students in California. And in the time that we have worked in the California system or talking with students about the UCs, we've heard a lot of different kinds of things, right? And so we wanted to just talk about some of the misconceptions that people have around the UCs, some of the things that you might have heard from your neighbor's gardener about how hard it is to get into certain campuses, and unpack some of those things as we go. So Becky, is there a dominant kind of idea that you find that you encounter in conversation about the University of California system?
Oh, that's a good question. We have talked about this before. I love the UC system for its transparency.
Yeah.
There are no secrets. They are telling you exactly, this is what we do. This is how we do it. This is what you should be thinking about. And yet I feel like we get more questions about UC admissions than any other system. And so I think that is the dominant myth, is that they must mean something other than what they're saying.
Right.
And the answer is no. They literally mean exactly what they are saying.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There are so many schools that are opaque, that don't give you any sense of what they're really looking at, how they're going to evaluate things. And you have to try. And I mean, it's part of why we have jobs, right? Is that like this process is really hard to understand. The UCs are wonderful in that you can find an answer to almost any question that you have about their process right on their website. One of the examples of those is the how applications are reviewed section of the app. If you want to know what they're looking at, they'll tell you. I'm going to pull that up just so people on the video can see the website where it's actually located. And then maybe you can talk us through it. There we go. Can you see that?
I can, yes.
Awesome.
And for those of you who are not following visually, the number one factor for admissions is the academic grade point average in A to G courses, your core academic classes that are, with UC Honors Boost. And so GPA, number one. And I think for so many families, that's where the conversation almost ends. It must just be GPA. And I love seeing this full list of 13 factors, because GPA is truly just one little piece. These are not weighted. It's not that each of these is 1/13 of the whole. But I love seeing the many different ways. They acknowledge smartness. Like here, number 6, the quality of your academic performance relative to the educational opportunities available in your high school. That's not the same as how many APs did you take? It's what's available in your high school. How did you maximize that?
One of the things I like about this list is that there's a level of simplicity for these first few factors, 1 or 2 lines. And then we get down further to number 10, which is a full paragraph that I won't read, but special talents and achievements and awards in a particular field, visual and performing arts. So they really want to say, like, look, we're trying to unpack the whole student. We want to do this holistic review. They are so big about saying that holistic review is a key element of how they're assessing students through this process. And just coming to this page, if you're applying to the UC system, you can search for how applications are reviewed, University of California, to find your way to this page. It used to be the 14 factors for admission. They no longer consider test scores. So now it's 13 factors for admission. And it's just an awesome thing, I think, to come and unpack.
And let's really highlight that. The 14th factor, test scores, is deleted.
It's not here.
They are not looking at test scores. They will not see your SAT score. They will not see your ACT score. That's not a joke. That's not a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. No test scores for the UCs this year.
That's right. They're completely test free. And that's going to continue on in through fall of 2024 entering classes. We'll see what happens after that, but we can trust that as they make changes to whatever their approach will be, they will tell us. They will be explicit about what their expectations are with respect to standardized testing if they choose to bring that back. But if you're applying to college, this fall, next fall, or the fall after that for fall 2024, we're going to be not looking at testing. One of the things, Becky, that I often hear, and I think that it sort of is answered by this list of factors, is you hear families that'll say, this student in my son's school or my daughter's school has a weaker profile than my daughter does. They got into Berkeley and my student didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that part of the fact that you can see so many different factors here shows that it's not just about what you can assess in terms of that profile. But I do think that there is something to this idea of what we perceive within our communities as strengths among unique students, and then how those strengths might be conveyed through the application. What do you say to families that have that conception of this person's stronger, but this student got in?
I think that with 13 factors for consideration, and with the richness of human experience that can be celebrated in special accomplishments or achievements, how do you possibly compare someone who is participating at an international level, the Junior Olympics for ice skating, with somebody who developed an app to help all of the seniors in their neighborhood find COVID vaccines when that became available, and was able to get 200 elderly residents without as much tech confidence plugged into a vaccine? Like, those are different people.
Right.
And there's no way to say bravery is better than empathy, is better than creativity, is better than curiosity, because they're just all amazing, different things. And so I think that's where it's so tricky, when what families see is the perception of intelligence, the perception of who raises their hand in class, or maybe you even know their GPA, but the character and the way that individual represented themselves on paper, we don't ever know what somebody else did.
That's
or
right.
Who read that application and what they thought of it.
That's right. And one of the things that you and I focus on, and all of the educators at College Coach, is when we look at the component parts of an application, especially the UC application, which has so many rich and interesting parts qualitatively, is how do you help introduce yourself to this reader? What are the essential elements of your experience through high school that you want this reader to understand about you? And the reality is that some students are better at that than other students are in terms of what they choose to focus on, and in terms of their ability to stay authentic to what they really prioritize and what they care about. I did a workshop yesterday. You were there with me, and we were talking about the UCs, and we were looking at the section for activities, and it was explicit in the instructions. We want you to share the things that are most meaningful to you. And yet we get questions all the time about which activity should I do, or which one should I prioritize as I put them on this list. Are there activities that are more valued within the context of UC admission than others? I know that's a softball for you, but let's see, see what you do with it.
Great question. No. And the UCs say that straight up. In that paragraph 10 that you showed us, they listed so many different types of activities. And they let students self-present in any way that matters, whether it's a job or a sport or a volunteer commitment you've had over time. All things are equal. And I think even there, robotics or swim are not personality traits. They're not character traits. Those are just activities. Swimmers represent a million different ways of engaging in the world. Kids who do robotics are not the same because they do the same activity. And so the challenge for the applicant is to figure out not which activity is most important, but who am I as myself? What is my heart and soul? And in which spaces of my life am I showing up in ways that model that?
Yeah. That's a great way of thinking about it. I had the pleasure yesterday of doing some brainstorming with a student of mine around the UC applications. We were really drilling into those kinds of questions. What is really important to you? And for him, it became abundantly clear, you've got to write about swimming. Like, this is so central to you. It models your work ethic. We're going to make sure that we've got some of that in the application. Now, we really like the UCs, I think, as admissions experts, because we don't have to try and figure out what they mean by things. But there are some there are some elements of the UCs, I think, that we wish that maybe they weren't quite as selective, right? Like that there's more space for students, because a lot of students really like these institutions. That's part of where it's like, oh man, I really wish it wasn't this way. And one of the things that I think students have the hardest time understanding is the role of the major selection in their application process, and how selecting a major affects where they are considered or where they are read within an applicant pool. And part of my instinct about why they have problems with understanding this is because of the Cal State system. So with the Cal States, you really do apply by major and you are read by major. And so there is a strong distinction, whether you're applying for English or for architecture or engineering, what your academic level of achievement needs to be in order to be considered. The UCs have a different approach than the CSUs do, but we still tend to talk about my major as being an important indicator for whether you're going to be selected for admission. Let's talk about that a little bit and where that goes wrong.
Yeah. And again, every UC campus is a little bit different. There are some campuses where they straight up, you are just admitted to the division. Some majors look at that major and will assign you that pre-major status. And so there is some variation, but in general, you're so right that students will have more flexibility in their, especially the first year, to shift around and find a new major within the general college that is not the same at the CSU, where you're really committed to your major.
Right.
And I think this is where, like, circling back to the master plan, the California master plan.
I knew you'd bring this up.
Yep. I love it. Everything in California, it's like straight up, they tell you what is what. The community college system is for everyone. Anyone who wants to continue learning in the state of California can enroll in their community college.
Right.
Then you have this CSU system, the Cal States, and that includes Cal Poly Pomona, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and the newest Cal Poly Humboldt State. This is for the top third of students graduating in California high schools. This is the smart kids, the ones who are really focused on learning and deepening their experiences. And then you have the UCs, which are the intellectual and research hub of the state, where new knowledge is being created that's leading the charge in what the world can do because of the PhD programs and the master's programs and that graduate level thought work. They definitely have undergrad programs. These are great undergrad institutions as well, but they are targeted at the top 12% of students. And the focus of the institution is on the research, this new knowledge, being a beacon of light in the world, in contrast to the teaching and learning that's happening at the CSU. And so that's where I think there's like all this stress about major and I've got to know. There's a lot of things happening in a 4-year experience at UCLA or at UC Davis. And it's not all about your major. And especially when the university is thinking about who are we educating, like the crown of the bio department at Davis is graduate levels,
right?
PhDs.
That's right.
And undergrads are still teenagers. Show up. We want to educate you. We want you to explore. We want you to dive in and maybe apply to grad school too.
Right. And there's so much more flexibility, I think, than students perceive when they are applying to the UC. There's so much more flexibility once they get there to do some exploration. That's not universal, and that doesn't extend to all programs. There is some sorting into different buckets that will happen, so that if you're interested in engineering, you are considered among all of the other students who are also interested in engineering. If you're interested in the letters and sciences, which includes at Berkeley biology and English and anthro and philosophy and even a computer science program, then you're considered in that bucket. So there's a lot of misconception around choosing a very specific major like philosophy and only being read among the other philosophy majors.
Right.
In reality, that's not happening at that level of detail. It's happening with the entire bucket of letters and sciences. So there are intended philosophy majors who are being read alongside intended computer science majors within that particular college at UC Berkeley. And you'll find analogs to that at other campuses. So I think one of the things that I want families to understand is it's not about the major, it's usually about the college. There are some exceptions to this, but the college within the university is that sorting bucket in which you're being considered with those campuses.
And when you're applying as a teenager, it is as a community member,
That's
as
right.
someone who's going to show up and engage. And so your essays and your activities don't need to prove your pre-professional readiness or your pre-major readiness. It's got to engage in your bravery, your creativity, your curiosity, your kindness, the human being that you are, not the future adult necessarily.
And that's so counterintuitive. And for some reason that crops up a lot with the UCs, with families, and it does it with me too. I mean, even when I think about the UCs, I'm a little bit more dialed into that and have to remind myself to pull back and think, this is about still building an undergraduate community of students who are in an exploratory phase. So I think that's a great reminder, even for us as experts, that's the key element of the undergraduate education. One other thing that I wanted to just bring up, because there has been a recent announcement on this front, and one of the myths we'll hear is it is easier to get into a UC from out of state, or it is harder to get into a UC from out of state. You hear both, right? Like on either side of the coin. And there have been some recent announcements that are affecting the population of students that are making up the incoming class. Do you want to walk us through what the UC Board of Regents has decided on that front?
Yeah. So UC Board of Regents is capping out-of-state enrollment at 18%. That has been the case for all but UCLA and Berkeley, and now they are adding that cap to Berkeley and UCLA as well, although it's going to be slowly putting into place over the next 5 years. The goal being we've got to serve the children of taxpayers. We've got to serve residents of California. And I think there's been a lot of frustration of the perception that it's so much, it's UCs are hard to get into if you're in state. That is true. In terms of the comparison with out of state, it really depends on campus.
Yeah, it does.
Because if you are applying to Davis, for example, I looked up these numbers because I knew you were going to ask me this. UC Davis has a 40% acceptance rate in California and a 72% acceptance rate for students.
Becky, it's easier. It's easier to get into. Come on, help me understand this. That looks pretty obvious.
The numeric stats of the students who are admitted isn't really changing. But keep in mind, if you're coming from out of state, you're paying twice as much to go to a rural college where you probably have a similar version of that in your own state. That's half the cost. And so the demand for spots is lower. And so it's easier to get in because there's less demand, but the quality of the applicant is not necessarily any different.
Right. And that's the important distinction. Yeah. Go ahead. You have more data to share.
Well, the flip side is this is just so campus by campus. Merced has an 87% acceptance rate in state and only a 60% acceptance rate out of state.
Interesting.
So there's more kids. It really campus by campus by campus, and you'd be surprised by some schools that vary in popularity. It's just how much do other people think this is a popular school versus not. But the quality of applicant is not necessarily different.
And this underscores a deep myth that I hear all the time about schools, which is if a school is more selective in terms of the percentage of students who get in, it is harder to get into. And that leaves out the quality of the applicants. And that is a huge, huge piece, because if you are choosing UC Davis as an out-of-state applicant, there is something really excellent about UC Davis that you see as a fit for you and that you can demonstrate through that application such that your quality of the application goes up. And there are fewer students who are choosing to make that choice. So that's why there's a larger percentage overall. But again, the quality of those applicants is likely indistinguishable from the quality of the applicants that are coming from California. And of course, we have to keep in mind that California is hugely populous. There are so many students there who all apply to most of the UCs. I mean, if they are college bound, I mean, we see that all the time. And the students that I work with, at least that are out of state, are usually looking at UCLA, Berkeley, UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, right, and not looking at some of the other campuses, which is just a measure of how those schools catch on with a national population.
Totally.
We thought we would have nothing to talk about. We've gone way over time.
Yeah, sorry
here.
about that.
This is,
Thank you for your time today.
Typical of Becky and Ian. When we get together, we take up way too much time. So we are going to close that segment. Becky, thanks for being here to talk about the UCs. And when we come back, we'll talk about having the financial talk with your teenager. Don't go away.